Hi, I'm Jackie Jorgenson, the creator of Tales from the Aether, and the host of this Q&A episode for The Witch of Rockwood Cove. Before we hear from other cast and crew in just a minute, I wanted to briefly touch upon writing, sound design, and editing, since those were also my roles in this production. So first, writing. I decided to start this project because I have a screenwriting and screen acting background, and I wanted to be able to produce my fantasy and historical work, but I knew I wouldn't be able to do so for screen due to budgetary reasons, but audio drama is much more accessible for me. And I decided that The Witch of Rockwood Cove would be a good place to start because I have a bit of research and background for other projects studying, witchcraft, and I wanted to explore it on a more fantasy kind of perspective. I think this season also sets the tone for the seasons coming up and really gives a good baseline for what to expect from Tales from the Aether as a whole. Season 1 took about 1 or 2 years to get through the writing process because I wanted to make sure that I had really evaluated all aspects of the story, that I had gotten feedback on it, and that it was really ready for listeners, that it was ready to be produced. So that required sitting down and really evaluating with fresh eyes what needed to be changed or what didn't, but it also required not looking at it for a while. And that's sort of how my writing process goes generally, so that's why I sort of took my time with Witch of Rockwood Cove. Sound design was really important because I think it can really complement an actor's performance. An example of this is Judge Peters in the second episode when he's having dinner with Kina and he smashes his fist onto the table. This is an important moment to get right with sound design because he's notably angry, but without the fist hitting the wooden table, and then the glasses kind of clattering, and then him leaning back in his chair and the chair squeaking from the movement of his body shifting, I think it wouldn't have really accentuated the brilliant performance by Chris, who performed Judge Peters. I respectfully disagree.
Enough! Enough of this talk, Kina.
I suppose
I've had enough! Now, let's have dessert.
In editing, everyone's performances were sent to me separately, and I combined all those together as a first very rough draft to hear how the scene was playing out. Then I incorporated music and sound effects to build out the performances, and from there I went back, and if I needed anything re-recorded or, to better connect to other actors or the scene as a whole, I then went ahead and did that, and then after that I ran through one last time and made sure it was just how I liked it before sending out to the cast and making sure it was exactly how they liked it. So quite a few steps in the editing process, and my first time editing something like this, but I'm really happy that I was able to hone in on each element of the production and make sure it was just how I wanted before publishing. Now let's move on and hear from some other members of the cast and crew from The Witch of Rockwood Cove.
My name is Chris Gregory, and I composed the music for The Witch of Rockwood Cove.
What does the score tell us about the town or its residents?
I tried to make it quite acoustic and folky to reflect kind of the period that the story is set in, but also probably the simplicity of the residents of Rockwood Cove. They would have had a simple way of life, so acoustic instruments seem to reflect that better than what I would normally work with, which would be electric guitars and synthesizers.
What was your favourite piece to compose?
The piece I enjoyed composing most was Kina's theme, which was a fairly simple set of chords that I just plucked finger-picking style on an acoustic guitar and then played a little piano motif over the top of it to try and bring out some of that, some of the emotion. But also something about Kina's character, there's a depth, but also a purity to her character that I wanted to bring out in that theme. Another piece that I really enjoyed was one called Slow Moments, and I felt that sometimes the pace of life in the town may have seemed slow compared to our modern way of living, but and I wanted to reflect that in in the music, but there's an undercurrent to that. So I used an instrument called, I used an electric guitar and a thing called an ebow. And an ebow, what it does, it sits sort of across one of the strings of the guitar and puts a little electromagnetic field through the strings, and so you get an effect as though you're bowing the string of a guitar with a bow the way you would a violin or a cello, and it just gives you that constant sound that you don't get when you just pluck a string. And so there's quite a bit of that. There's a bit of synthesizer, and it's just a slow piece of music that just has this slightly ominous undercurrent, which I thought was appropriate for Jackie's piece.
What was the creative process like for creating the music?
Really, I based a lot of it on folk tunes, old English folk tunes, and I read a few years ago that when people travelled from England over to the United States, they would have taken folk songs with them, and so it's possible to identify similar tunes, but they've evolved slightly differently on each side of the Atlantic. So I used a couple of traditional folk tunes as my as the basis for what I was doing, but I took them in slightly different directions, which may have been what happened, the way that music naturally evolved. So you find the same tunes on both sides of the Atlantic, but they'll be called different things, and they'll have slightly different lyrics. And there's a song called the Cuckoo, which seems to exist on both sides of the pond, but has evolved in really different ways. And so, the music isn't based on that tune, but I was thinking of that tune in terms of trying to capture some of that evolution. So there's a piece called One Morn in May, and there's so many English folk tunes that begin as I walked out one morn in May, and I just based it loosely on one of those. Fingerpick guitar, a little bit of mandolin, I think, and just a really simple tune, really.
Now on to acting. I play Kina, so I'll be joining in on answering these questions, but let's hear from some other cast of The Witch of Rockwood Cove.
Hi, I'm Jason Tenletti, and I played Guest.
My name's Chris Gregory, and I play the farmer.
I'm Markham Luttrell, and I played Farmer 3.
What choices did you make for your character's voice, and what does it reveal about them?
Playing the farmer, well, in playing any role, it was a real a first for me, because I'm very reluctant in front of a microphone. So I play in a band, and there's 5 of us in the band, and I'm the only one not allowed a microphone. Even the drummer gets a microphone, but I don't. And so being in front of a microphone performing as an actor was terrifying, really. So I based the character of the farmer on a British radio drama, and I believe it's the longest running radio drama in the world. I think it started back in the early 60s or even the 50s on BBC, and it's called The Archers, and it's a story of farming folk, and the family is called the Archer family. And so I based my farmer on that show that I still occasionally listen to, but I certainly listened to it when I was a kid. And it's a composite of a few characters from The Archers.
The choices I made for the voice of Guest was to make him sound like the most impatient, unruly customer any tavern or inn would ever want to hold. He's very self-centered and very me as much as possible.
I decided to use an Irish accent for Kina because I wanted her to broadly make sense in coming over with the Puritans, but I wanted her to stand out. I wanted her to not fit in even by virtue of her accent. I wanted people to maybe see her as an outsider already, maybe be a little bit suspicious of her, and not necessarily create tension there, but I just wanted it to be yet another way that Kina is not going to blend in with this group.
Ah, so they didn't eat you alive after all.
No.
Good.
Chop up, love.
You know, people are usually pretty tentative about newcomers here. If you've won them over already, that's quite an accomplishment.
Well, that's always the way with small towns. People don't want to hear clever words and watch a fancy pitch. They want to see results, and they want to hear a clear plan.
First off, I just want to comment that I always pictured Farmer 3 as being his actual name, kind of like Farmer Maggot from J.R.R. Tolkien's Lord of the Rings novels. I wanted Farmer 3 to sound reasonably uneducated in the typical schooling, book learning sense of the day, because in my mind, he's been working the land all his life. But I also wanted him to be energetic. Whatever he did, whatever he said, I wanted him to sound energized. I pictured him as being a farmer who was raised by generations of farmers, and it's all he knows, but it's also all he loves. He's passionate about farming. So I wanted the energy in his voice to kind of bring out that aspect of his personality. A little bit more backwoods, but loves what he does.
What was the most exciting or challenging moment or aspect of your character, and why?
The most challenging moment for me when performing Guest was there's only so much of the drunken rambunctiousness of his voice that you can do until all this just does a huge number on your throat. It was definitely challenging, but it was very enjoyable.
I actually got to act in a voice, in an accent that's not my own. I love doing character voices, always have, just for fun. But I've never actually gotten to act in a British accent before. Not outside of just quoting a character from a movie or something. Never on a professional level. And so I was thrilled to do that. Ironically, that was also the most challenging part of Farmer 3, was having to do a British accent. That and the fact that it is actually surprisingly challenging to create a full character that feels fleshed out in my head when it's just one line that you're doing. Giving them a backstory in your head is key to actually doing that.
Keener, I'll inspect your work first thing in the morning. If I'm satisfied, I here and now make it clear to the rest of you that Keener is hired to tend to my fields next.
Oh, and then me.
And then me.
Hold on. I will draft a timetable. We will respect the claims thus far, but if interested, sign up. No need to overwhelm the poor girl.
The most challenging moment to perform as Kina was actually something that you can't hear. I wrote this moment when she is casting a spell at Judge Peters in episode 3, where she's just been basically crushed by a fallen piece of wood in the barn. She's gotten up off of that. She can't breathe. She's rushing over. And in Latin, she casts her spell at him. So that's, out of breath. It's highly emotional and angry. It's in an Irish accent. And it's in Latin. And that was quite challenging. But you don't hear it because I needed to fade into her approaching him. So you only really hear the last part of her spell. There is a whole rest of that spell, which I worked very hard on and was quite tricky to perform. But also really, really fun, I think. It's nice to have a bit of a challenge like that.
The most exciting or challenging aspect of playing the farmer was just acting, really. I'd never done it before. I played the odd part in alternative stories and fake realities, but only when they were really small parts and I couldn't be bothered to get another actor to do them. So I played lots of unnamed parts before, and I guess this is another one. So farmer, policeman, lifeboatman was another one in alternative stories. But so acting doesn't come naturally to me, really. I'm more comfortable on the other side of the microphone.
How did your performance develop as your character developed? Or how does your character influence the development of the scene they're in and the characters around them?
I think in playing the farmer, I wanted to bring across the fact that ordinary people in Rockwood Cove could start to do extraordinary and out of character and unpleasant things, and whether that was because of wry ergot or whether it was because of a mass hallucination or peer pressure or whatever it was. But I think I wanted to play the farmer as a decent man doing things that were not decent because he was swept along in that movement. I always liked you, Daisy. I don't want to do this. If you just tell us where she is, then I can help you. That's it. I just want to help. But we can't trust you unless you... Stop it, damn it. This could be a passing moment in your life. It doesn't have to be the end of it. Such a waste of your beauty.
If you really cared, you'd just untie me.
You know I can't. She's all set.
Good. Once the sun is down, we begin.
I tried to make conscious choices about the way Keena's voice would develop as the season goes on. When she first arrives, she's pretty shy, and I wanted her voice to be quiet and nervous and shy. But then it becomes quite energetic and passionate at the end of episode 1 when she discovers Daisy in her room and she really stands in her principles. And then from there, with Daisy, I wanted her voice to sound more confident, more assured, more energetic. With other people from that point on, I still wanted her to sound a little bit more nervous, but she's getting her bearings in the town, and I wanted her voice to have a little bit more energy to it and a little bit more confidence. Then by episode 3, when she is like, screw it, everything has not worked out, whatever, caution to the wind, she's really herself, I think, and I wanted her voice to be stronger and powerful, and again, even more energy than episode 2. I made that choice because I wanted her voice to reflect how her character's changing, and how much she's learning and growing in her time in Rockwood Cove.
With Guest, I feel that he is a very interesting character to break up the serious aspects of the story, and, you know, while everyone else is honor-bound and very headstrong, he acts as the comic relief in a very unique way.
I recommend avoiding all food with grain in the meantime.
What about beer?
Anything with grain.
Silence! I know for a fact that won't leave us bone dry.
Yeah, wine.
Calm down, calm down.
I feel that any character who interacts with him absolutely hates him, but at the same time, he does give everyone the comic relief and the small break from the emotional and heartfelt moments of the story.
What are your social media handles, websites, and or other projects you are involved in?
Okay, so I'm currently active on Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube, all under my own name because I tend to forget my own account name if I name it something clever. I'm also on voice123.com as of this year. As for projects I am currently involved in, I'm in the process of wrapping up the writing of my first novel. It's been a few years in the making, but I finally made it. Title is still pending, but I will say that it'll be a sci-fi set in the 2030s, and if all goes as planned, it should be published later this year. I'm also working on creating my own podcast that will tell the story of the prequels leading up to my novel.
I've worked a lot with Jackie before on productions for my podcast, which is called Alternative Stories and Fake Realities. And you can find us just by searching Alternative Stories in any podcast app. We're on Spotify and all over the place. And you can search for us on Twitter and Instagram. We're stories.alt and storiesalt on Twitter and Instagram, respectively.
If you enjoyed hearing me perform as Guest, you can find me on social medias. You can find me on Twitter at jtenlettivo, also on Facebook, Jason Tenletti. You can find other projects I've been involved in, such as the Minecraft roleplay My Hero Academia Episode 3, produced by Pixel Dip on YouTube, and I am also a dungeon master for a long-standing Dungeons & Dragons campaign that shall soon be releasing and airing on YouTube.
Thank you to everyone who participated in this Q&A episode. Thank you for listening to the first season of Tales from the Aether, The Witch of Rockwood Cove, and this Q&A episode. Season 2 is on its way, so be sure to follow Shared Manifest Entertainment at Shared Manifest Entertainment on Facebook and Instagram, or Shared Manifest on Twitter. Thanks for listening. We'll be back soon.